Hello, everyone. Welcome to Caspian Policy Center's second regional webinar. This is an excellent event that we are organizing together with the embassies of Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan. I'm glad that we continue the tradition, and this time we have very high-level representatives from the region and also from the US government. I'd like to thank all the participants on behalf of the Caspian Policy Center. The countries of the Caspian region face difficult economic issues as a result of the global pandemic, but can also use this situation to make decisions that positively shape their future well-being. As challenging as the current situation is, governments and international institutions are also keeping an eye on how to position countries as the global economy reopens. Strong cooperation, coordination, and assistance on both global and regional scale will be important to the Caspian region's recovery as policies based on sound economic principles. Today, this conference will be an excellent opportunity to explore actions the countries and international entities can use to bolster cooperation, financial support, technical assistance, and capacity building collaboration in response to the damage caused by the pandemic. As the director of the Caspian Policy Center, I'd like to hand the floor now to our dear Ambassador Bob Sikuda to start the moderation of this excellent lineup of the speakers. I hope this discussion will create interesting insights and lead us to a right way in shaping our economies and building policies in post-epidemic situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Afghan. Thank you, Afghan. Thanks for the introduction. Akbar, thank you very much for all the work you've done to help organize this. Just a couple of housekeeping points to begin with. First of all, there is an interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. You can choose the language channel that works best for you. The original audio will be in English if no language channel is selected. But participants listening to the Russian channel will hear translated audio, but they will hear the original language sort of going on at a lower volume. I will ask, because of the number of very good speakers which we have, but also because we want time for Q's and A's and this cross discussion. I try to ask speakers to keep their remarks to 5 minutes so that we do have that time for discussion. So with that, I would like to kick off our presentation or discussions this morning with Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Trade Policy Negotiations, David Mealy. I've had the pleasure of working with David at various times when I was in the department. His recent postings include Director for Sanctions Policy and Implementation in the State Department's Bureau for Economic and Business Affairs. He was also Economic Counselor in Kiev. In addition to other positions, including he was the Associate Dean for Leadership of the Management School at the State Department's Foreign Service Institute. He's had postings in China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Bangladesh, and Guinea, as well as in Washington. And so I'd just like to kind of get us started here. And I will start our timing. But David, from your experience and your standpoint, looking at the international trading system, what is your sense of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on trade? And can you say a little bit about how the U.S. sees this, and maybe a little bit of what the United States is doing to sort of address these problems, as well as sort of any perspectives on the region itself? Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador Sikuda. It's good to see you again. Afghan, thank you for your opening, and good morning to everybody. I'm pleased to see such healthy participation today, and very happy to be part of this morning. I will keep my remarks to 5 minutes, and therefore they will not be very detailed, but I'm very open to drilling down in the Q&A. But I'd like to open by answering Ambassador Sikuda's question, which is essentially, how are we responding on a policy level to the challenges of COVID-19 to economic interaction? And I'd like to just touch briefly on 3 areas where we're seeing very big changes at the State Department. One is supply chains, 2 is our trade engagement and trade talks, and 3 is our approach more generally and philosophically to other countries and economic relations on a on a theme of trust, what we are referring to as our economic prosperity network. First off, let me note that supply chains have always been a topic of conversation. If you go back to 9/11, you can find US government strategies and international strategies about how to make sure goods keep flowing, and they flow in ways that align with global economic growth and with national security needs. That said, COVID-19 has really underlined the question of supply chains and how they affect the global economy and how they affect us. We are finding ourselves increasingly asking three questions. First, what is it that our people and all people need to have uninterrupted access to, even in times of global shocks? Those shocks could be geopolitical events, they could be natural disasters, they could be pandemics. I think countries around the world are asking this question. We have been driven very much in this direction by struggles to make sure that we have supplies of personal protective equipment in this country. And we've been doing a lot of work at the State Department supporting FEMA in identifying international sources for PPE. The question also extends to the pharmaceutical supply. There are a lot of bottlenecks in the world regarding pharmaceutical ingredients. Many of those ingredients, for example, come from China or come from China through India. We have to ask Congress, and many in other countries, for example, in EU countries, are asking themselves, is that an optimal way to organize your drug supply? So question one, access for your people to goods. Question two, does the existing arrangement of supply chains in the world give rise to unhealthy geopolitical activity? Does it drive military power or technological power in ways and to countries where it should not? So there's a real national security question there. And then question three, and this applies to all countries, do supply chains evolve in the world in a way that gives rise to the fair and value-added economic development of countries that have the most to offer to those chains? In the United States, we're looking ahead to many emerging technologies, and we know that that the way that countries approach trade, the way that countries approach investment, will shape access to those chains and how those chains are developed, and also their resilience, their redundancy. So we're doing a lot of thinking along these lines at the State Department and as part of our interagency, and we see that going on with Congress, we see it going on with the think tanks, we see a lot going on at the microeconomic level with the private sector. Issue two, trade negotiations. Bottom line here is we are not going to let up. COVID-19 complicates moving forward on trade. It opens up issues such as export restrictions on medical goods. It opens up issues such as food security challenges that may come with export restrictions in that area. That said, we're going to be creative. We're going to keep moving forward. We are in the middle right now of virtual trade negotiations with the UK for a new trade agreement. Next week, we will start doing the same thing with Kenya, for example. We continue to look very closely at China's compliance with its phase one commitments. We continue to engage the EU on issues like digital services taxes. As you can see, our trade agenda is unabated, even if it is virtual. Finally, I'd like to introduce the concept of trust in international economic relations. We are engaging countries in a bunch of different areas on a trust basis. What I'm referring to here is an effort led by our Undersecretary for Economic Affairs, Keith Kroc. He's very focused on what we call our economic prosperity network. You look at issues like commerce, trade, digital activity, energy, infrastructure, education, research, healthcare, financial flows. And you realize that in this modern technological digital era, trust really underpins every single transaction in those areas. And there are qualities of trust such as transparency, integrity, accountability, rule of law, respect for property, labor rights. We are bringing all of that together conceptually, and we're pursuing initiatives such as, and maybe we'll talk further in the Q&A, the Blue Dot Network to certify quality infrastructure being built around the world, or the Prague Principles to ensure communication security around the world. We envision a network of protocols, principles that involve countries, corporations, and civil society coming together and identifying the basis for trust in their interactions, in their economic interactions in the modern world. I think that COVID-19 is only bringing emphasis to this, and you will see a lot more coming from there in US policy. I believe my 5 minutes are up, and I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was really great. Really appreciate it. And I think it's also, I know there is interest from some of the governments on the Blue Dot Network. So that may be something which we talk about further along in the Q&A period. Thank you again so much for that. I'd like to turn the floor over now to Mr. Caleb McCary. Mr. McCary is the counselor to the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Development Finance Corporation. As counselor, Mr. McCary is leading DFC's diplomatic and interagency outreach. Among his previous work assignments, he has served as the senior professional staff member to Senator Bob Corker as the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's held senior positions in the State Department, as well as having led U.S. aid-funded missions in Central America. Mr. McCary, the Development Finance Corporation was officially launched last fall, and it gives you the U.S. government and the U.S. business community some important new tools. Can you talk a little bit maybe about the steps that DFC is taking and what the agency can do to foster business and prosperity in Central Asia, especially in this time when the countries and the U.S. are facing these problems of conducting trade, growing our economies in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Can you hear me okay? Very good. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I think this is both important and timely. And let me say that on behalf of DFC, we appreciate the opportunity always to reach out to our diplomats, our former diplomats who have served our country well, foreign embassies here in Washington, and the broader policy community. You know, when I worked for Bob Corker, he always taught me to look and understand what our interests were and what would actually move them forward. And the conclusion that he drew and I drew always was that our interests are moved forward when they're connected with shared interests. And when we have the opportunity to help others advance their own interests in ways that are consistent with our values and the way we like to do business, which is within the rule of law and transparency. And so when I was brought on to be the counselor, our CEO, Adam Bowler, who is himself an entrepreneur, was a very successful businessman, then served at the Department of Health and Human Services, reforming our in-home assistance to the elderly and other things, which he has actually had great success at doing as well. But he turned to me and he said, look, why don't you identify like the top 10 places we should be working? We should be concentrating our efforts in places where we can actually make a difference. And we need to be doing it in a way that is strategic. And so that was both a great opportunity and a bit daunting to come up with that. But Central Asia and the Caspian region immediately came to mind for me. And I flagged this for Adam Bowler. And in fact, he's in Uzbekistan today. So I think that that at least speaks to our immediate commitment. Let me say this. We are in every instance looking to maximize DFC's resources to help support strategic investment and economic growth. We have four basic products that we are able to put forward. The largest is debt financing. Congress doubled our ceiling for debt financing when they created the DFC. We have straight equity that's limited because that's on a dollar for dollar basis with appropriated funds. We have a new mezzanine equity product that we've worked through with the Office of Management and Budget, and we have political risk insurance. These are the tools we bring to the table. We are particularly interested in all forms of energy and energy independence. Last year, Congress gave us a broad exception to work throughout Europe and Eurasia on energy issues, but it's not limited to that. In the post-COVID environment, we have done several things. The first is we have a $2 billion program to support investments in the medical sector and pharmaceuticals and other things related to COVID. And that includes supply chain diversification. We are also have been reaching out to our counterpart DFIs in Europe. We have a very good strategic relationship with the Japanese Bank for International Cooperation to coordinate our efforts to increase our support in the COVID and post-COVID environment. Internally, what we've seen is we have had ongoing projects that have come back to us asking for support in terms of being able to weather the storm, if you will, and our board has given us authority to do that. We also see that it's going to be important for DFIs to play a role in helping to reinforce private sector lending at a time when banks are likely to be more risk averse. That's why we're here. That's part of what we do. I do hope that in this discussion, and especially in the Q&A period, you can help us understand where you think we can be of most help in the Caspian region. And so for me, this is as much a listening exercise as being available to answer questions. But that's just a brief overview of where we are. I think that we have been successful in that, thanks especially to, excuse me, Adam Bowler's energy and leadership. We have actually been able, I believe, to meet the expectations Congress has for the DFC to be a positive strategic instrument of U.S. foreign policy. And I'll turn it back to you there.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I think also, I mean, people should be thinking about the Q&A. And I very much appreciate your point about sort of listening to each other, because I think that's one of the things that is important in these webinars like today, is not just sort of broadcasting, but hearing from what
exactly.
And so with that in mind, I'd like to turn the floor over now to Ajmal Ahmadi. Mr. Ahmadi was appointed to the position as the acting governor for Afghanistan Central Bank in June of this year. He was previously acting Minister of Industry and Commerce and was also senior economic advisor to the president. He has previously worked at the World Bank, Booz Allen Hamilton, U.S. Treasury Department, and the Afghan Ministry of Finance. And so I think maybe now if we can sort of turn this over to Mr. Ahmadi and kind of get into the idea of what's happening in the individual countries. So Mr. Ahmadi, let me give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sakuda, Mr. Meal, Mr. McCurry, panelists, everyone who's participating in today's event. Thank you. Greetings and good evening from Kabul. I'd also like to thank the Caspian Policy Center for organizing this important event and all the colleagues on this call. I wanted to structure my comments in two areas. First, in terms of COVID crisis and how that's impacted us and how we responded to that. And then secondly, in terms of regional connectivity initiatives and an overview of regional connectivity issues. Obviously, the COVID-19 crisis is a common challenge for all of our countries, and it's caused most countries around the world to provide unprecedented monetary and fiscal support. Least developed countries will likely be severely impacted, and given Afghanistan's location close to other countries, neighboring countries who have been impacted, we expect the caseload here to significantly increase. It's our belief that the coronavirus pandemic will have 5 phases. So we've taken a long-term approach for dealing with this crisis from the outset, where the first phase is discovery, where we acknowledge the existence of COVID-19 and take some initial measures, such as social distancing. Diffusion, where the COVID-19 spreads amongst the population, and here in Afghanistan, although our testing capability is low, we expect or we forecast that a significant portion will be affected. Adversity, where the population is faced with the health and economic effects. Relief, where support policies are implemented, and recovery, where we move towards normalization. Afghanistan, we believe, is still in the second or diffusion phase. And to manage this crisis, we've initiated some strategic initiatives that I think are important. I think the first is from the health perspective. What we've done is prioritize the health of our citizens. So the president took the decision to initially close down large parts of the country. We've built some hospitals. We've tried to procure PPE equipment, both from domestic sources and international sources. And I think the second step we took was, as a result of this, a significant part of our population, especially in urban areas, live day to day or receive daily wages for their food supplies. So we quickly created a food distribution program that partners with local bakeries. So in Afghanistan, we have bakeries in every corner of every city. And we, rather than us supplying bags of wheat ourselves, we came with a relatively innovative approach where we partnered with wheat wholesalers to provide flour to these bakeries, provided a share of the flour to the bakeries, and just asked them to cook for people who are on the distribution list. So this was important because it allowed us to go from project conception to implementation in only 2 weeks. And I think helped, especially during the early stages, to make sure that food riots and hunger issues were dealt with, especially in urban areas. Third, and I think probably most relevant for this discussion, is trade and transit issues. One of the key strategic issues that we've tried to manage here in Afghanistan is diversification of our trading partners over the past few years. Probably 5 years ago, we received the majority of our food supplies just through Pakistan. Over the past few years, I think there's our colleagues from Kazakhstan here. We now receive the majority of our wheat and flour from Kazakhstan. So recent partnerships with both Uzbekistan, through which we transport it, and Kazakhstan, which supplies it, has been very important and transitive. The one example I'll give is in 2007, when there was a wheat shortage in Pakistan, flour prices or bread prices tripled in Afghanistan. This time around, even with the closure of the border with Pakistan, food prices only increased 30%. So it's a rise. It was a food price shock, but a manageable one, I think. We've also worked very closely with Pakistan to create innovative mechanisms for the borders to reopen. With Pakistan, for example, we developed a joint mechanism where trucks coming to the border, the Pakistani drivers would step down, an Afghan driver would go into the truck would be sprayed, and then enter the country. And so that's allowed us to restart trade across the border, even in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. And I think that was some of the innovative type of actions we tried to take to limit the impact. In terms of regional connectivity, I just want to make a comment to the partners on this call. I think about some of the joint projects we have and how we're trying to integrate with the Caspian region. First of all, with Azerbaijan, when I was Minister of Industry and Commerce, I developed a MOU between our national gas company and SOCAR of Azerbaijan, which we signed so that we can obtain more fuel supplies from Azerbaijan. So we're trying to build a strong relationship there. With Georgia, actually we signed a framework, an agreement with the former Prime Minister of Georgia, who came and provided advice on doing business indicator reforms, of which Georgia was very successful. And we've used that to be the top reformer in the 2018 doing business indicators. With Kazakhstan, as I mentioned, very strong partners, especially in terms of the wheat and flour areas. And with Uzbekistan, I think it's been a transformative change over the past few years as we've greater integrated with Uzbekistan. Finally, let me mention with the US, just this morning, I noticed the previous speaker was from DFC. This morning, I spoke with DFC CEO, Mr. Boiler, who's accompanying Ambassador Khalilzad on his trip. So there was a discussion between the ambassador and the leadership of Afghanistan. And I participated in terms of the discussion on economic issues. And I'm happy to note that we sent over a proposal for a strategic type of partnership, and in principle, the reception was quite positive. And so I think we want to continue that and move forward with specific project proposals with the DFC. We look forward to increasing the collaboration there. So with that, let me stop my comments, but thank you again for the opportunity. And I look forward to hearing from everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that's very helpful. And I think it's also, I think as you pointed out, the connection within the region itself are quite important. I think historically, Central Asia has been one of the least integrated, internally integrated, and it's been one of the things which I think has sort of held back development there. So these are important developments. So it's actually very good to hear, despite the focus on COVID, the things that are moving forward. If I can turn now to Mr. Ravshan Najaf, who is Deputy Minister of Economy in Azerbaijan. Mr. Najaf was appointed Deputy Minister of Economy in February of this year. He has worked as the chairman of the board of the Azerbaijan Financial Monitoring Service since September 2019. Previously, Mr. Najaf worked as Executive Director of Azerbaijan Investment Company and led the department in Azerbaijan's presidential administration. So with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Mr. Najaf for 5 minutes. Thanks.
Yeah, Ambassador Sekuta, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege to address this esteemed audience. And we all know that the world economy is undergoing a critical period because of the serious consequences of the global COVID pandemic, and which has not passed by Azerbaijan. Compared to the first 5 months of last year, in January-May 2020, the total GDP decreased by 1.7%. and the nominal GDP by 2.1%. The same trend was observed in the foreign trade, and the inflation was 2.9% during this period. Once again, the pandemic has proved that we need a sustainable economy to withstand such a crisis. Of course, depending on how resilient an economy is, the pace of the recovery will differ from the country to country. And on the other hand, reasonable and pragmatic post-pandemic policy will be key in speeding up the recovery process. To this end, Azerbaijan government has promptly reacted to the emerged situation, and in a short time, a comprehensive action plan has been prepared, and the action plan covers short and medium-term measures with the aim of preventing and mitigating the repercussions of the pandemic. We have adopted economic and social packages addressed to hundreds of thousands of taxpayers, including micro businesses and unemployed people. The state has already provided financial support to more than 130,000 businesses and supported salaries of more than 200,000 employees. We have introduced tax incentives and tax holidays to prop up businesses in the post-pandemic period. For instance, the taxpayers in the economic spheres which have been directly affected by the pandemic are fully exempted from the property and land taxes, and 75% exempted from profit or income tax. As to the medium-term post-pandemic measures under the action plan, in order to revive the economy, it is targeted to implement a new model of economic growth. Firstly, we intend to maintain the pre-pandemic pace of the economic growth, save existing jobs, and create new ones by means of expanding domestic demand. To this end, 8 sectors have been selected as the priorities of economic policy. Those are construction, mining, petrochemicals, digital economy, transportation, trade and logistics, telecommunication, agriculture, and agribusinesses, and domestic and regional tourism. At the same time, according to the action plan, the state investment holding, which will centralize the governance of the state enterprises, will be established to improve the public property management system. And last 6 months, even more vividly, showed the irreplaceable role of the digitalization for the economy. It's important to keep pace with the global digitalization process. Therefore, we target digitalized national economy in the long-term outlook. It's noteworthy that a regional center of the Davos World Economic Forum for the Fourth Industrial Revolution will be also established in Baku. In order to stimulate more investment to the countries, the government implements economic reforms targeting more favorable conditions for investors. A new law on investment activity is being drafted, and we are close to the completion of the new investment promotion strategy. It should be noted that businesses, including American Chamber of Commerce in Azerbaijan, have also provided their appreciated input to the work of the draft law of the new investment. Investors can benefit from a variety of incentives in Azerbaijan. The country has created a number of industrial parks with significant benefits to their residents, such as exemption from corporate income, land and property taxes, as well as value-added tax on the imported equipment for the period of 10 years. Currently, we have industrial parks in petrochemicals, agribusiness, textiles, manufacturing, recycling, and one is pharmaceuticals, as it was previously mentioned by one of my colleagues, which is also one of the important spheres in diversifying the supply chains. And in Azerbaijan, we have the whole large industrial park, which is dedicated to pharmaceutical production. And we have currently 3 resident companies there, but our aim is to increase the number of the companies located in this industrial park. And besides, these industrial zones offers investors opportunities to collaborate with existing and ready-to-operate facilities. Such collaboration and such option may save foreign investors time and money, and in current circumstances, majority of the international companies looking for diversified supply channels and diversified manufacturing sites. Azerbaijan may offer such opportunities where the investors can establish greenfield manufacturing sites, implement greenfield projects, or can cooperate and get collaboration with local producers, which already have the state-of-the-art technology and all necessary infrastructure in place. Besides, Alat Free Economic Zone will be an attractive place for doing businesses. I believe that favorable trade regime, which Azerbaijan has, and free trade agreements we have with regional countries, will also have a positive impact on the decision of the investors. And on the final notes, I would like to touch the issue of the transportation and logistics. And Azerbaijan has invested a lot in its infrastructure, in its transportation and logistic infrastructure, which also makes Azerbaijan one of the excellent points in regard of diversifying supply chain. And in conclusion, I would like to thank the organizers of this event. I would like to say that current pandemic shows that no country standalone can solve all the problems, and we have to cooperate, and we have to increase the cooperation, international cooperation, in response to the crisis. And it's very important to build a more resilient economy And today's discussions will be another opportunity to learn from each other. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Minister. Thank you. Appreciate that. If I can turn now to Mr. Beka Liluashvili, who is Economic Advisor to the Prime Minister of Georgia. He works as the Economic Advisor. He's participated in the World Economic Forum in Davos and is a member of the Georgia delegation. And I think he can sort of tell us a little bit more, sort of build on the different points that have been raised by the previous speakers in terms of what's going on in the particular countries. So if I could turn this now, the mic over for 5 minutes now to Mr. Liluashvili. And I'm very sorry for not getting your name quite right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. It is an honor for me to participate in this very important conference today. I would like to underline the importance of and usefulness of this platform, as today we can see that the tight cooperation between partner countries is utterly important and needed as never before. Yes, as our partner country representatives have already indicated, current difficulties related to the pandemic and followed economic implications are utmost tangible, almost for all countries in the region. And we all saw how the IMF noted that the result, the pandemic to the global economy is projected to contract sharply by 4.9%, and the projections were actually the previous projections were more optimistic. Now they worsened actually, these projections. So of course, no need to say that the pandemic had the severe impact on the Georgian economy as well. The virus impeded the positive economic trends in Georgia emerging last year. Namely, in 2019, there was an unanticipated high economic growth of 5.1%. Tourism revenues amounted to 3.3 billion USD, 18.4% of GDP. Export revenues, 21.2% of GDP. Remittances to 8.9% of GDP. So consequently, the national current account deficit hit the historical minimum of 5.1% of GDP. So generally speaking, this gave us ability to enter into the global recession with the substantial buffers in terms of fiscal stance, as well as improved capital buffers in the financial intermediary sector. But of course, the coronavirus shock significantly worsened the Georgia's economic prospects in 2020 and during the years to come. Slower economic growth in partner countries is likely to make a deep negative impact on Georgia's export and remittances, and continued global uncertainty about the pandemic is expected to result in the reduction of the capital inflows or the planned investments. The International Monetary Fund forecasts that due to the pandemic, Georgian economy in 2020 will contract 4%, minus 4%, but then it is likely to grow by the same 4% as 2021. But as for today, Georgia did manage comparably well in terms of controlling the spread of the virus. And just for your information, number of confirmed coronavirus cases in Georgia is 928, out of which almost 800 has already recovered, and unfortunately 15 died. We are observing 2 to 4 cases on average on a daily basis during the last month. So in these circumstances, we now are able to let the economy fully operate. Surely it's impossible to supplement exogenous production determinants like tourism, depressed global consumption and demand remittances, but we are now able to fully utilize the internal economic activity. For this perspective, regardless of the limited data we have, we observe some very preliminary signs of improvement, let's say so. During the state of emergencies that we declared during the April, the economic activity was dramatically reduced. So we were observing the minus 60% GDP growth, But then after 23rd of May, when we canceled the state of emergency and started the reopening the economy, we are now observing that during the May, we have a little slight increase in an economic activity. So the GDP growth has, let's say, the GDP growth was minus 13.5%. There are some improvements in terms of export of goods. And also we are observing slight improvements in net remittances. Also, the bank credit portfolio has increased. That shows the improvements of business sentiments, at least internally. So tourism is the primary area through which the pandemic negative consequences affect the country's economy. Overall service export in 2020 is likely to drop by 55%, which includes a 70% drop off in revenues from international visitors. The situation in the tourism industry affects other economies, of course, and other sectors of the economy, including construction and real estate. So Georgia has introduced one of the biggest anti-crisis package, which fully complies with the international best practices defined, for instance, by IMF in its last WEO report. We're in a process of implementation, and we hope that the measures will give us opportunity to overcome liquidity constraints within the economy, because we're observing some liquidity constraints in the financial intermediary sectors, and then the nation, let's say our central bank has introduced the temporary regulatory framework. Within this framework, they have introduced the number of measures that enhance the liquidity of the banking sector. And now within our anti-crisis measures, we have introduced several instruments that directly addresses the problem of liquidity within the banking sector, within the private sector. Apart from the social assisting measures, and total value of the anti-crisis measures amounts up to 4 billion Georgian lari, which is up to 7% of GDP. So this is the current stance. As for the future prospects, we are on a track, and we are staying on a track of improving business environment in Georgia. Where, as you know, Georgia, compared to the peer countries, has highest investment per capita number within the economy. And during the last year, we reached the unprecedented number of public investments into the infrastructure. We're developing the connectivity. We have the highest, the biggest set of free trade agreements with the EU, with the China. We're in an active, let's say, discussion with the Israel.
I'm going to have to ask you, though, Mr. Lewis-Fili, to maybe wrap up a little bit, because we're going to start running out of time.
So basically, this is where we stand now. In terms of epidemiology, we comparably well performing. So this gives us opportunity to plan how to develop our economy, how to stimulate internal demand, and somehow, let's say, create additional stimulus for economic enhancement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And again, it's very interesting to sort of hear, and I think, come back to the Q&A a little bit, how Georgia's been able, in many ways, to sort of stay open through the pandemic. And I think particularly we were talking about tourism, which is an area that so many countries are finding very difficult to deal with. Can I turn the floor over now to Mr. Bauer Bektemirov? He provides direction to the Astana International Financial Center's development strategy and economic research agenda. He advises the governor there on economic issues and oversees the development of regional infrastructure financing at the center. Mr. Bektemirov is a member of the management board of the AIFC Authority, which is the main body of the center, the board of directors of the AIFC's Business Connect, its business development arm. He's also an independent director at the Kazakhstan State Fund for Social Security and an advisor at the Digital Economy Task Force at the UN SCAP Sustainable Business Network. And again, I think one of the points which has sort of come up along the way, we'll talk about maybe more in Q&A, is the role of the digital and all of this. Speaking of Q's and A's, I would just like to remind everybody there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Please fire your questions into that, and we get to the Q's and A's, which I want to we will pull from those later on. So if I could turn the floor over now to Mr. Bektemirov. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's a great pleasure to talk here, and it's a great platform to discuss because all of our countries, which are emerging markets, share similar features, and we have similar challenges. And emerging markets, in addition to the epidemic shock, have obviously different shocks like the supply and demand shocks. Some of our countries like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan have suffered through the collapse in oil prices, and we also have different shocks. But what's important here, I think what government of Kazakhstan is trying to do is to structure the policies, the public policies to combat the crisis, and also looking forward in 3 different directions. The first direction is very simple, it's to flatten the curve, and that has been discussed widely, and I'm not going to spend much time on that. Basically increasing the hospital capacity, helping people, and introducing more tests, etc., etc. Then the second, which is quite important, it's about fighting the consequences of this crisis, because people have to stay at home, people have to be locked down. We had introduced lockdown, one of the first countries in the region, and in March and April we've been working from home. I mean, I've spent most of my time working from home, and this is very important because we have to keep economy afloat even though people are staying at home. So the government has introduced different measures. I think it was spent about 9% of GDP was spent on different measures, both helping the government directly the population. For example, there were one-time transfers to people so that they will keep the consumption, keep the spending. And of course, looking forward to the future programs, there are a few different programs that have been launched today. And as we discuss here, the government is discussing the strategic plan for next 5 years, which takes into account the current circumstances and designs and lays out the policy for the government to achieve the sustainable growth after we successfully come out of the current crisis. But I think what's important here, especially when we talk about fighting it, it's that we keep the economy afloat. Even though we understand that we will see the contraction of the economy, I think the official projection is about minus 0.9 growth. I mean, the 0.9 contraction, and there are different estimates. I think IMF was predicting 2.5, and the World Bank was around the same numbers. But what's important, because this contraction is mainly due to the contraction of net exports, which is quite obvious. We're no longer exporting oil to the same amount, to the same volume that we used to before. But what's important is to keep the consumption, to keep the household consumption, to keep the household's income at least on the same level. Hopefully we'll be able to do it in the same level. So that's the first and foremost task for the government. I think they're doing it quite well. I mean, we had this one-time transfers. The government has regular meetings. The president himself is taking this, the country under manual control. They have the weekly briefings, which is, I think, very important to have this. And for the looking forward, I think this is very important because the government is looking forward in laying out the long-term reforms. And I think that's something what we are doing also at the Financial Center. And I was listening to, for example, Mr. Ahmadi comments about the partnership with on the wheat and flour. This is very important because agriculture is becoming more and more important, because this is about food security. This is about new opportunities for growth, for trade. And it's about diversifying our economy and our exports. So this, for example, agriculture is on the government agenda. It's very, very serious. And I hope that our partnership and our relation with the countries like Afghanistan and other countries will only strengthen going forward. The second thing that you mentioned about connectivity, and it is true that previously the countries were not connected very, very well because we were part of the one country. And to be honest, we were very well connected with Russia, with the center, with Moscow. All the connections, if you look at Central Asia, were south to north or north to south. But what we have done in the past 20 years, I think it was the tremendous job of all the countries to have this connection connecting west and east. And if you look at, for example, what Azerbaijan have done with the port of Baku, or with what Georgia is doing with the port of Anakli, port of in Batumi, I think there's a lot of important job has been done to connect the region And I think this is also the way forward. I mean, you mentioned that I'm looking to this infrastructure financing. This is something that it's very dear to my heart, to my own research and economic agenda, to work on the infrastructure, to connect this and to see how we can work together once the crisis is over. And you also mentioned the digital economy. I think this is very important. And because in the current crisis, there are some industries that definitely will have a hit, and there are some industries who actually, I wouldn't say prosper, but at least have grown. And I think we're here on Zoom, and Zoom is a perfect example how industries actually are growing. So in Kazakhstan, for example, the volume of cashless transactions in the past couple of months has increased multifold. I think it was like 2 or 3 times than it used to be before in the same period of time. We see more and more, I think e-commerce is growing, and e-commerce itself has been growing since the SARS pandemic back in 2000s. So we see the new rise of this industries. I think it's very important today, as we're fighting the crisis and helping the economy to keep afloat, to also look forward and find the new pivots, find the new points of strengths, find the new institutions which are resilient to look forward. And I think cooperation will be important. And what we're doing at the International Financial Center, we want to be the local, regional financial hub connecting countries in terms of finance, but also even in the physical, because we are looking forward to the digital Silk Road and the Silk Road along the countries. I think this is very important. These are my points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think I want to sort of echo a point that you made, and I think it's a key one. We've been talking a lot about what countries are doing, but I think, you also made the point about looking ahead. And I think, the one thing that gets caught in the whole question about the pandemic is fixing things now, but it's also an opportunity to try to reshape and to try to move forward. And I think, it's some things that Dasmili talked about and Makary and others is something we may come back to later. I'd like to introduce now Mr. Fuat Kasamcan, who's Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Trade in Turkey. Mr. Kasamcan has worked as the Deputy Director of the Ministry since 2013. From 2011 to 2013, he was the head of the department in the ministry. He has his bachelor's from the bachelor's degree in economics and Middle East Technical University. So Mr. Kasamcan, if I could turn the floor over to you to talk about Turkey, which is an especially critical player in this part of the world.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Distinguished panelists, dear participants. First of all, I would like to thank Caspian Policy Center for organizing this priceless webinar on economic effects of COVID-19 in Caspian region. I hope this event will provide new tools to participants for analyzing the recent developments in the region. As you know, the Caspian region that we share a common history and culture has a key role for Turkish business circle with its stability and geographic position. We always try to keep connections close between business circles. While geographically this region is a gateway for Turkey to Asia, we are also connecting and carrying the resources of this region to Europe. The new landmark of cooperation in energy, namely the Trans-Anatolian Natural Gas Pipeline, TANAP, which enhanced the energy supply security of Turkey and Europe through bringing natural gas produced from Azerbaijan's gas field, is ready to carry gas to Europe. In every field, we will keep strengthening our cooperation with countries of the region. We are very pleased to see that all countries have a common understanding to increase the wealth and security in our region. On the other hand, as all participants are well aware, the COVID-19 pandemic is an unexpected development which crashed the global economy. IMF and WTO had to revise downward their global growth forecast respectively, minus 40.9 and minus 8.8 in the worst scenario. In this wavy period, we took some measures in domestic trade to secure the supply and international trade to keep the channels open. In order to keep the economy working, our government announced a comprehensive economic stability shield program. With this package, employment was secured, the real sector was supported, and liquidity and financing concerns in the market were resolved. In addition, the export of some basic products has been tied to the preliminary authorization or registration to ensure that there is no supply shortage in the domestic market. Taxes on imports were also zero. We always believe that dynamic domestic demand and steps taken by our government will minimize the possible negative effects of pandemic in our economy. The first sign was the GDP growth in the first quarter of this year, and we reached 4.5% annual GDP increase. Also, since the beginning of June, we have been observing positive signs for recovery in the economy. We estimate that our economic growth will be positive zone despite the negative economic effects of pandemic. In this new era, we need to figure out new instruments to keep our trading stable with the region. I would like to share some of innovative measures we applied. In order to minimize the negative effects of the pandemic in our transportation, we encouraged the contactless trade and created buffer zones at our border gates. We let trucks enter into our country after completing their sterilization, let truck drivers to change their vehicles in buffer zones. It was a temporary case. Nowadays, our borders are open to all trucks. These pandemics once again demonstrate the importance of diversifying modes of transport and use of railways in our foreign trade. As you know, the Baku-Tbilisi railway project is an important part of Central Corridor, and we took necessary precautions to carry 80 container cargoes per day over the BTK line. With the aim of operating the BTK at full capacity, we are working with the countries in our region to simplify customs procedures, speed up operational transactions, and establish a competitive tariffs. This pandemic also points out the importance of digital platforms and e-commerce. With the digital custom project, single window system, and e-commerce customs declaration system, we carry out our customs procedures to digital platforms. Also, COVID-19 epidemic has undoubtedly limited the mobility of the business circle, especially at trade fairs and delegation. There is a delay. So we have completed legal infrastructure to organize trade delegation and fairs on digital platforms, and virtual trade delegations fairs were successfully achieved in the fields of agriculture, iron and steel, chemicals, etc. We believe that enhancing the regional cooperation will have crucial role coordinate the measures taken by countries individually and lead finding out solutions to limit negative effects of the pandemic. In this regard, we have prepared an action plan, including the necessary steps which will be taken at the extraordinary situations under the umbrella of the Turkey Council. Also, in parallel with our obligations, we always inform WTO about the measures we took because of the pandemic. Now, many countries eliminate the measures and try to normalize the daily life and trade. But the big question is still on the table. How can we step forward with our experience in the pandemic times? Our experience will enlighten our way to find markets for our exporters and assure the delivery needs of our importers. For the first part of the equation, our experience showed that digital platforms and the contactless trade will be at all countries' agenda. Not only COVID-19 pandemic, but also Industry 4.0 pushes the countries to transform traditional channels and means into digital. Considering the lack of transportation, adapting the outputs of new technologies into business life will create a strong alternative for the traditional channels. We are ready to share our experience in this field with our partners, trade partners in the Caspian region. For the second part of the equation, all countries once again understood the importance of supply chain and international transportation in the last 4 months. It is obvious that taking necessary steps to decrease the cost of transportation will contribute to sustain the regional trade. In this regard, we need to promote the usage of middle corridor and make the Caspian Sea passage more attractive by providing low cost comparatively.
Mr. Caspian,
I'm finishing, Mr. Ambassador.
Tie this guy. That's a very good point about Caspian, but we're running, the time forces are against us.
Just finally, I would like to say that the BTK line, very crucial role in promoting middle corridor. And I would like to thank you, and we are ready to share our experience during the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And again, using the infrastructure that's there, physical as well as digital, is important. If I could turn now to Mr. Shukrat Vafayev, who is Deputy Minister of Investment and Foreign Trade in Uzbekistan. He has been in this position since 2019. Before this position, Mr. Vafayev was the head of the Department for the Coordination of the Investment Processes and Programs of the Presidential Administration. So if I could turn the floor over to Mr. Vafayev from Uzbekistan to talk about what's happening there and your perspectives on the region.
Thank you. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the COVID-19 basically made all the countries of the region to work and communicate with neighboring countries in a much faster pace, in a much less formal way, using all ways of communications, Zoom, WhatsApp, Telegram, and etc. And it demonstrated that together, in close cooperation, we can face and handle global challenges in a much better way. I hope that this spirit of close cooperation in dealing with shared challenges would be applied to much broader issues of common interest for all our countries in the region. So I believe, and we in Uzbekistan believe, that one of the main important responses to COVID-19, to disruption of supply chains, transport and logistical connectivity, is a strong regional cooperation and partnership. In terms of responses and policy responses to the COVID-19 in Uzbekistan, I don't think we did and doing pretty much anything unusual or something unprecedented. We are doing pretty much the same as many of the countries are doing, giving first of all priority to health and safety of the population by strict rules, by precautionary measures, by providing timely care for ones who infected. And in terms of supporting the economy and economic activities, we are providing sizable support through our anti-crisis fund, which was established initially at the level of $1 billion US. Now it's expanding, and it's tax holidays, tax breaks, utility, transport cost subsidies, interest rate subsidies for private sector. What was different this time, though, is that the government made put a lot of effort in ensuring that all incentives and all these measures of support reach basically up to this last mile to private sector, to citizens, and to ensure that they work and benefit targeted groups of population and business. Second, we limited direct social support and payments to most vulnerable and focused on providing support to the population via support to businesses and enterprises, helping them to keep their employees paid, helping them to maintain their activities, operations, and production in a protected and quarantined areas, and of course, helping exporters to continue exporting via transport subsidies or transport cost cover support, and of course, helping them to overcome all barriers, logistical barriers, which came in force due to quarantine regimes in many countries around. And this is where regional cooperation, regional context, direct access to our colleagues in governments in neighboring countries was extremely important. So to summarize, we found that a strong and productive and constructive regional cooperation and partnership is extremely important for to face global challenges. And second, all governments need to ensure that this much stronger regional cooperation translates into reduced transaction costs and support to the real sector and to the private sector in conducting their businesses, both within the country and outside. Let me stop here, and I'm ready to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. It was a very good point that you made regarding increasing regional cooperation and reducing the transaction costs and the different things that go on. And some of that, I think, goes back to what Asmili talked about and some of the others. So we can get to that further questions and answers. If I could turn now to Dr. Natalia Tamarisa. She has assumed her post as new chief of the International Monetary Fund's mission to Azerbaijan. She's worked as assistant to director of research department in the IMF. Much of her research is centered on various countries' vulnerabilities to financial and economic disaster. So I think she's actually in a very good position to sort of help us start tying this all together and talking about what she sees in terms of particular countries in the region. So if I could turn this now over to Dr. Tamarisa.
Thank you very much. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here with you today. The pandemic has been clearly an unprecedented shock for the entire world, and the Caspian region has not been spared. The pandemic has taken a heavy toll on human lives. Statistics in the region, like across the world, are subject to measurement errors, and testing capacity also varies across countries. Countries in the region have reacted quite swiftly to contain the pandemic by imposing broad-ranging movement restrictions and social distancing measures. And now some cautious reopening is starting. And countries that imposed particularly stringent containment policies earlier in the pandemic are now starting to relax the restrictions. And we see examples in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan. But physical distancing continues to be enforced, and businesses are required to comply with precautionary measures to reopen. And here some of the examples include Georgia and Kazakhstan that are requiring face masks as mandatory for at least indoor public settings. As we discussed earlier on this call, the pandemic has dealt a severe blow to the economies in the region and through multiple channels. So containment measures have slowed mobility and affected particularly job-rich services sectors. The fact that this pandemic is so synchronized and global in nature means that trade has contracted, that disruptions in supply chains occurred, and tourism and remittances declined. Also, an important channel is oil prices and oil production. And the sharp decline of oil prices that we have seen, especially in earlier this year, together with production cuts among oil exporters, are compounding challenges for many countries in the region, particularly hydrocarbon exporters such as Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Some countries, however, are benefiting from increases in gold prices, and this particularly refers to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Another channel through which economies are affected are capital flows, which reversed sharply across all emerging markets, but also including countries in the Caspian region, especially in March. And this also led to the widening of sovereign spreads. Since then, since March, sovereign spreads have narrowed somewhat, and market pressures on currencies in emerging markets in general and in the region have abated. Besides containment measures, policy responses of authorities in the region focused on strengthening healthcare systems and supporting incomes, households, and the economy. All countries in the region have ramped up healthcare spending to ensure that health systems are able to cope with fighting COVID. Also, as we discussed earlier, targeted fiscal measures were put in place, mainly to support vulnerable households and also the affected businesses. And this includes direct cash transfers, in-kind transfers, suspension of utility and loan payments, and other actions to ease cash constraints. And particularly since April, we have seen increased focus on supporting SMEs with time-bound tax deferrals, delayed tax deadlines, utility holidays, and additional credit lines. Many central banks have allowed exchange rates to move, and they have eased policy rates to provide additional support to the economy. Let me now turn to the economic outlook. As many speakers mentioned, this year growth is expected to decline. And growth projections for countries in the Caspian region have been revised down by the IMF by more than 5 percentage points in our forecast in April. Now that we released a new forecast this June, further revisions have been made. For most countries, the current shocks will have a larger impact than what was experienced during the global financial crisis in 2008-2009, and also during the oil price shock in 2015-2016. And the reason for that is that the pandemic is this unprecedented combination of simultaneous demand, terms of trade, and supply shocks through disruptions in supply chains. Next year, we're expecting a recovery, but the outlook is highly uncertain with significant downside risks. And without a medical solution to the COVID pandemic, the strength of the recovery will remain highly uncertain, and the impact on sectors and countries quite uneven. An important feature of the current outlook is that external and fiscal positions in countries are coming under stress. This is particularly clear in hydrocarbon exporting economies that are being hit by this double whammy of COVID-19 pressures, but also lower oil prices and production. So current account deficits among oil exporters are widening, and this is led by the sharp fall in exports. And the effects are most pronounced in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. And imports are also declining because of currency depreciations and slowdown in economic activities. In oil importing countries, the worsening of external positions is driven by lower remittances and also contraction in external demand. And in 2021, external positions are expected to remain weak because of despite the projected economic recovery.
unfortunately, with time is coming, so if I can ask you to wrap up to give your, this is very important what you're saying, but we're stuck on time, so maybe.
Sure, yes. So, what are the key priorities at the moment? So the key priority is, of course, to fight COVID, but also it's important to try to protect the engines of growth. And we spoke on this call earlier. This requires mitigating effects on the hard-hit sectors and on the households. And looking ahead, it's important to keep an eye on the medium-term challenges. And this includes long-term structural reforms to social protection systems. This also includes an issue that is on the agenda for many countries, and this is dealing with rising public debt and taking advantage of the opportunities, like improvements in digitalization. And just the last point is the role of the IMF in responding to the crisis. We have been providing policy advice, financial support. Many countries that are participating in the call received emergency financing related to COVID, but also benefited from the containment and relief trust initiatives of debt reduction. And we're working closely with our partners in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very helpful. And I think, again, this notion, not just what we're dealing with today, but how we're going to look into the future and try to take steps that we take today to help shape that future. Not just be reactive, but help determine how we want to move ahead. Our last speaker is Dr. Esmira Jafarova, who's Deputy Chairman of the Center of Analysis for International Relations in Baku. If I can turn the floor over to her, she previously served in Azerbaijan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and as an advisor to Azerbaijan's Minister of Energy. So, Dr. Jafarova, if I can ask you to speak for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sikura, and thanks everyone for comprehensive speeches. I hope you hear me well. Yes? Okay. So I'll try to keep it short and focus on some important milestones. Definitely when the scales of global pandemics acquired bigger proportions, Azerbaijan was also struck by this surge. And when we had the first case confirmed on 28th of February, the government was swift to close down the country's borders, restrict international and domestic transportations. They closed the schools in early March and all the shopping malls were strengthened Saturday gradually. And the entire country was put under lockdown and the quarantine was enhanced incrementally as the situation so demanded. From 5th of April onwards, people were only allowed to leave their houses for basic needs like grocery shopping and pharmacy needs, etc. On 4th of May, we tried to reopen the economy and some services have started to reopen again. But again, the quarantine was tightened because there were some increasing cases of infection. And the special quarantine regime is extended now until 1st of August, with the SMS permission system still being in place until that time. First until 5th of July, and then it's incumbent on further decisions. And as I said, operation of all public and private entities were suspended and all the public events were postponed. And more than 15,000 Azerbaijani citizens have been evacuated from various countries by charter flights, which are organized by the state, and government has also been providing financial support for the vulnerable citizens that are stuck abroad amid this pandemic. The Special Coronavirus Support Fund was established on 19th of March, and government and other types of organizations, entrepreneurs, they were very swift to extend financial support to the fund. And as of the end of June, over 100 million manats were donated to the fund. Moreover, the government prepared 9 programs worth 3.5 billion manats, which is 3% of the GDP, to support the economy and entrepreneurship. And the idea is to put back the economy as soon as on track as possible and to weather this COVID-19 storm with minimum losses. To guarantee the rapid and coordinated response mechanisms, we have operational headquarters under the Azerbaijan Cabinet of Ministers who are monitoring the situation and informing the population and also taking the necessary decisions as the situation so demands. And obviously the pandemic has affected not only global health, but also the economy So is Azerbaijan's economy, especially with the oil prices fluctuating since the beginning of March, when the OPEC Plus group was not able to agree on a next production adjustment agreement. We saw the rapid and very sharp slump in oil prices, which also affected as well the economy. However, Azerbaijan had some extra security before the oil prices slumped, because the oil prices were high in the beginning of the year. For the couple of months, beginning of the year, the oil prices were about $60 and the budget proceeds surpassed the expenditures for about 400 million manats in January alone, and also plus some proceeds from tax and customs services. They testified to increasing income to the state budget. So the overview of extra financial reserves acquired since the beginning of the year, in fact, enabled to compensate for the losses incurred due to the coronavirus-induced decline in oil prices. And then we had the agreement by OPEC Plus in April, 9.7 billion barrel reduction. And then which was also extended for July, and we're seeing some kind of positive dynamism in oil prices. Of course, it's very, very tenuous balance, and we should be cautiously optimistic about what is yet to come for oil prices. But what I'm trying to say is that we've seen that the international cooperation is taking place, and there is some kind of positive dynamism, and we're looking at it with some kind of optimism. And on some other note, I'd like to mention also some global initiatives by Azerbaijan, because I know we're under time constraint. I'll just focus on a couple of initiatives that Azerbaijan put forward during this pandemic, especially the convening of the Turkish Council and Non-Aligned Movement online meetings in April and in May, which were very important in terms of generating global support and trying to forge the global solidarity in order to cope with the pandemics. That was very important and timely by the Azerbaijan's initiative. Azerbaijan donated $10 billion to World Health Organizations, especially in order to help the needy population in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And during this NAM online summit, not ministerial, sorry for that, online summit, Azerbaijan initiated the convening of the United Nations special session related to COVID-19. And very recently, just a couple of days ago, this initiative was supported by the 130 members of the United Nations, which is 2/3 of the United Nations members. So I think this is a great achievement, and we yet have to see what is yet to come from that meeting. But still, it's very important in terms of generating global solidarity to fight this scourge. And to conclude, it's definitely the case that the ramification of COVID-19 and its impact on the world economy and everyday lives of citizens, we have to yet to see and estimate. However, one thing is clear, that there will be no winners and no losers of this global calamity, and everyone is affected. So is Azerbaijan. However, Azerbaijan's strong standing before the outbreak as an energy and reformer state, and swift measures to contain the virus, as well as operationalization of the state support mechanisms, can offer the case for optimism that the country could quickly return back to normal and continue the works uninterrupted with greater rigor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I also want to note the number of questions that come in, because we've kind of gone along the presentations, which were all very good and very useful, I think. I'm going to waive speaker moderator right to ask the first question, but try to combine some of the questions which we have received. And with that in mind, I'd like to sort of start off with Dasmali and with Mr. McCary, because I think a couple things that have sort of come up in the course of this discussion, again, is this not just where we are today, but where we want to go. And David, you talked about the Economic Prosperity Network and what it is that the U.S. is trying to do on that front. The Blue Dot Network is something which I've received other questions about. If you can talk a little bit about that and how these sort of fit together, and again, helping these countries move forward. And also, Mr. McCary, if you could talk a little bit about the mezzanine fund and how that works. And I think in all of this, how are we still, have we sort of, in light of the current situation, are we being a little more lenient or a little more open to countries, or have we moved the bar at all in terms of application for programs and so forth? So I'll let David, maybe if I give you first dibs on that.
Sure. Okay, so let me describe the Blue Dot Network. This is something that we launched in November of 2019 at the Indo-Pacific Business Forum. We launched it with Japan and Australia. We have Canada, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, and the EU have all been part of steering committee meetings, and G7 members and observers are also involved. First, let me just say to this group, we welcome interest from the Caucasus region in this. We hope all countries, involved or interested in upholding, the kind of global quality infrastructure standards for projects that the Blue Dot Network will certify. Again, the idea here is to create an environment where private sector capital is comfortable flowing into new infrastructure. We do not subscribe to the state-led model represented by the Belt and Road Initiative. We recognize that in order to increase the comfort level to meet infrastructure needs, we need something of a certification process to identify promising new projects. And so that's what the Blue Dot Network is going to be about. We're in the early stages here. Again, this just got announced in November. We were revving up and then COVID hit. And so, look for more on the specifics. But let me take this to the Economic Prosperity Network. The Blue Dot Network is a subset. The concept here is moving forward on trust-based principles. And I've heard a lot about that today as we've been talking. We started off with, at the very beginning with Efgan, who talked about principles, actions, means of cooperation. We're talking about the same thing here. And I know there's quite a bit of interest among a number of the countries here about how do you communicate with us about this Economic Prosperity Network. Again, it encompasses a wide range of areas. I mentioned trade, energy, financial transactions, a number of other areas as well. But think about this. It's about making sure that transactions are trustworthy between countries, that in a networked world, we need to make that our organizing principle. You'll see more from us on this. You're already seeing Undersecretary Keith Kruk speak out a lot about it. You're seeing reference in various bilateral meetings to it. If you want to communicate with us, go ahead and talk to me, mealed@state.gov, and I'll make sure that I flag your country's interest in engaging us more there. Of course, communicate with us through traditional diplomatic channels. Make sure your civil society, your private sector, and your government are talking to our embassy about the appeal to them of trust-based networks. Make sure in Washington you're doing the same, like I just suggested. And then think about using our scheduled capitals-based agendas, our economic dialogues and so on, to build agendas that touch on this. We're very happy to respond. We're integrating trust principles, supply chain issues, approaches to the Blue Dot Network, approaches to 5G, approaches to other trust-based ways of promoting trust-based commercial interaction into our agendas for these kinds of dialogues. So consider the door open for that. I hope that is helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Mr. McCary, could you maybe talk a little bit, sort of build on that, sort of what DFC is doing, particularly in terms of also, I think there's a specific question on the mezzanine program.
I saw that. Thank you very much. So I'll kick off by answering the mezzanine question. So what it is essentially preferred equity. And it is available across our portfolio. Obviously, our largest account for disbursements is debt financing, but this new product is one that we do want to use strategically. Let me also just comment briefly on the Blue Dot Network. And that is that this actually originated at our predecessor agency, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. And what it really is the way that we do business and the way that other DFIs do business. And that is adhering to some basic standards, adhering to standards in terms of transparency, in terms of environmental and social impact. These are all aligned with the International Finance Corporation, the World Bank standards that they have in place. And I think probably the most important standard is this. I mean, it's important to understand that, you know, at DFC, we work with the private sector, and we work to leverage private sector financing. We do also work in private-public partnerships with government, where the private sector is a majority stakeholder. And the thing that for us is important as a development finance institution is sustainability. So the reason to have standards, the reason to review investments is to make sure that they're going to succeed, that you have a good chance that it's going to succeed, and that it's going to have a return on investment. And that means that the kinds of investments that we engage in tend to have a long horizon, longer than the private sector. We can provide loan tenor for up to 20 years. So we're in it for the long haul. And what it means is that when we make an investment and we support an investment and we work with you and your countries, your governments and your private sector on an investment, it's going to be there over the long haul. And there's a very good chance it's going to succeed. That doesn't mean that there isn't risk involved. Of course there is. And that's part of why we're here. We're here to assume risk. We're here to work with the private sector to private sector banks in the countries where we work, US banks that are partners, to help share that risk and perhaps create opportunities for financing in markets where the financial sector is perhaps reticent to go into an area. We'll take a leading risk on something. And so these are some of the things that are the way we work. I would also add that we're very interested, I have to say I'm very impressed with the depth and breadth of the presentations here. You have brought together some key actors from across the region, and to have everyone together is really quite extraordinary. And I think we also need to think outside the box. I'm an optimist. I think we're going to be fine, okay? I think that, but this is also an opportunity, as you said, Mr. Ambassador. This is an opportunity for us to identify ways in which we can work together, and also to understand where is there a priority for you and for us. You asked the question, Mr. Ambassador, about you know, how are we looking at these things? Let me just walk you through briefly, and I'll stop here because I want to leave time for questions. But when Congress created the DFC, they wanted us to focus on low-income and low-middle-income countries as a priority, and that is our priority. That does not mean that we won't work in upper-middle-income countries. And the way this works is, you know, within that prioritization, we have developed a foreign policy prioritization. So if something is a high foreign policy priority, that actually helps advance it regardless of the income status of the country. And so in this case, we're talking about a region that is strategically very important, that and where we have a strong interest in making sure that we're investing in ways that will actually help. I will leave it there. I just wanted to underscore that this is an important seminar, and we are very open to discussions with your governments and with your private sector going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very good, and I appreciate building on those things. I'm going to try to synthesize a bunch of the questions and toss this more at the figures, the officials, and those out in the region. And then, as we've Mr. Rafayev, others have talked about increased cooperation, coordination within the region, the BTK, digital, other things. One of the questions raised things like Heart of Asia. What's being, we're talking about increased connectivity within the region, and that's something which we wanted to see, what increased coordination, but are there ways under consideration to sort of firm this up? can we sort of going back to sort of, what David talked about in terms of sort of the context for doing business? Are there ways that the governments in this region can be working together to sort of make this gel a little bit more?
Can I jump in on that?
Please.
Okay. So I am speaking for myself. Okay, this is as part of my job is to be a strategic advisor. Well, to be the strategic advisor to the CEO. Your question is an excellent one. Let me just preface this by saying that we are working very hard in Eastern and Central Europe on something called the 3 Cs initiative. This is an initiative of the governments of these EU member states who have, there's been a substantial amount of investment from the EU, primarily in East-West integration, which is extremely important. But there's a real need for North-South integration. And so these countries came together and created an initiative to create a privately managed fund to support investment in infrastructure, energy, and digital economy for integration. So this is hard infrastructure, digital integration, and energy integration as well. We have an exception for high-income countries, so we're going to be able to invest in the energy sector. But we're also reaching out to other funders and to private sector sources of funding, like pension funds, to encourage them to join DFC in investing. We've said we'll put up to $1 billion in this fund. We only provide 30%, so we're looking to leverage that in a significant way. And so I guess the question that's in my mind is whether or not the countries of the region might be thinking in a similar way, where it's possible together to think about an investment fund that would cover the entire region, that could, on the private side, help mobilize private capital to address your needs, which I think align with those that everyone else has seen. Particularly the real challenge that's going to happen during this and really the post-COVID period is to attract investment, and as our economies restart and are strong. So just a thought on perhaps there's that's something to think about, right? And we're always open to projects in addition to thinking about such things in each country. And what we want to do is whenever we engage, we want to make sure that we have a few projects that we're lining up that we can execute on and get moving on and help create the space and the synergy. We have a lot of experience, for example, in Georgia. It's been very successful. We actually have an investment fund there called the Gazelle Fund that has been very successful there as well. And so I think there are precedents for these kinds of ideas. Thank you.
Ambassador Sakura, if I may also comment on that question.
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I had to deliver my statement rather quickly because we were under time constraints, but I'd like to take this chance to speak a little bit on this international cooperation question. Many of the speakers mentioned the importance of middle corridor in this current circumstances, and I just wanted to align with that idea because Azerbaijan is also a participant, is also an important chain of that particular project, which has gained special importance in these difficult times in order to sustain the global value chain and connectivity. And we have also been supporting Hearts of Asia initiative with Afghanistan. And in 2017, there was a conference of Hearts of Asia held in Baku. Some of you mentioned also some energy project. I think it was representative of Turkey. And many of you know, of course, I mean, it's a common knowledge that Azerbaijan has been the initiator as well as the participant and supporter, and one of the participants as well of the Southern Gas Corridor, and which is coming to a conclusion hopefully this year. And we have seen the pumping of the first gas in the Albanian section of the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, which is over 95% complete, which is a great example of international cooperation. And Southern Gas Corridor is a multi-million mega project that actually generates greater cooperation and partnerships in this greater region, which contributes to sustainable development, energy security, and all those big names that are associated with cooperation, solidarity, development. So those are just some of the examples of international cooperation that are useful also in these current times, because seeing those projects going unhindered also gives a sense of kind of accomplishment, and also solace that we are still moving in the right direction despite all those challenges, and that after everything is over, hopefully one day, we will just continue from wherever we were, and we will not be suffering from, let's say, energy poverty or energy, let's say, challenges in terms of sustainability of energy. So I think those are great examples that international cooperation is still continuing, and we all have to carry on with what we have. And
I'd like to build on that a second, if I could, and that is, I'd like to just, we're rapidly running out of time, but I'm looking particularly at Mr. Bektemirov and Deputy Minister Najaf, Deputy Minister Ahmadi, in a sense, sort of on these things, which Caleb mentioned and others have mentioned. Do you have particular thoughts in terms of the middle corridor, in terms of how we can institutionalize some of this project going forward, or how we, sort of move that? Again, we only have a couple seconds for everybody, but if I could maybe just ask, I'll go in order of my screens here. Mr. Bektemirov, then Deputy Minister Najaf, and Deputy Minister Ahmadi. Mr. Bektemirov.
Thank you. Yes, I think what's important in this situation, it's worth saying that we have suffered from the capital outflow. Now we need to secure investment. We need to secure also investors, and for them to come back to our countries, because the assets underlying in our countries, I think they're quite attractive. They generate enough revenue, interesting profits, but then during the uncertain times, because of the volatility, the expected value of the assets is diminishing. At the same time, because of the uncertainty, the expected risk and the costs associated with risk are also increasing. So how do we change that? How do you address that? I think we cannot change the nature of our assets. We are doing our work to diversify the economy, introduce more value added to the products we produce, but it's not gonna possible to do it overnight. But then when we talk about the cost and the risk, I think there's something that we can do. I think that the institutions, it's an important feature of that. And we've seen, for example, that Georgia has done a tremendous job in solving this risk and improving their institutions. And that's why it's no secret that there's a lot of investment going to Georgia right now, because they have solved to some great extent the problem with the quality of the institutions. And that's something we're trying to do in Kazakhstan. I think our example could also be helpful for other countries, not even to replicate it, but just trying to find how we can help. So because I'm right now connected from our studio, the International Financial Center, and what we have created is independent jurisdiction with independent legal system, with the British judges, the president of our court, the first president was the ex-Chief Justice of England and Wales. We have introduced the new regulatory system. We're now working. We have introduced the new entity which works on the Business Connect to actually help to connect investors with the projects. I think by introducing this in the international rules of the game and working under the principle of common law, we're trying to reduce the risk associated with the investment. I think that could be helpful as well. And we are happy to work with other countries. I think we actually encourage other countries to reach out to us and work together and find the ways how we can work together in this, especially in this difficult circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Minister Najaf.
Thank you very much. I think there are already several platforms which can be suitable for the causes we have already raised today. And I think the most important part is to review the agenda of these platforms and to create synergy between these platforms which exist. In comparison with creating something new, we can improve the efficiency of the existing platforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I guess Minister Ahmadi, sort of again from Afghanistan's point of view.
Mr. Ambassador, actually, His Excellency Governor just left for a meeting with IMF, so I will just take note of your remarks and the questions if you have.
Okay, good. any other comments from our group here, just basically to sort of tie us together here? Any last comments anybody would like to make? Maybe just raise a finger and jump in. Okay, Mr. Vafayev, please.
Well, I like very much the idea of some joint financial platform which can promote investments together in different countries. And as a first step, we can mention our effort we are making with our Tajik friends in setting up Uzbek-Tajik investment company in Tajikistan. And of course, I join everybody who stress the importance of transport corridors and improving efficiency and communications through railroads and roads. Your mic is off.
Yeah, no Zoom event is complete without somebody having to be told that their mic is off. It's now officially happened. Thank you very much. At this point, we've gone over time, but I'd just like to turn the floor over to Afghan to maybe, tie things together from the CPC. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ambassador Sekuda, for excellent moderation. I'd like to close this event building on what actually our colleague from DFC said. This is indeed an extraordinary group of speakers and the panelists. And together with the embassies, we put a lot of effort to bring this group together. And I would suggest actually in coming months to perhaps repeat this session and come together, evaluate where we are and monitor our progress, see on what areas we can perhaps make some advances. And we have received excellent questions from the audience as well. I'd like to thank them for tuning in. CPC, together with all the embassies, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, Georgia, Turkey, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, we look forward to continue organizing similar events in the future as well. I again thank you for all the government representatives here, and we hope to continue our dialogue and the cooperation. If you have any questions, if you want to engage bilaterally with the CPC, we welcome that as well. I also thank to our staff here. They put a lot of effort to this event, and hopefully we will continue doing this successful events in the future as well. Again, thank you, the moderator as well.
Thank you all very much and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.